Hello. Oops. Hello, you guys, and welcome to Cast. As you know, I am your host, Cassidy Streeter, and today we're looking at Week 8 of the NFL. So, or wait a minute, Week 8? Wait a minute. Am I losing my mind? Maybe I am losing my mind. Is it Week 8? Wait a minute. Oh, it is Week 8. Okay. It kind of saddens me that it's Week 8. I'm not going to lie. Only because I think that, like, oh, we only have, for some people's teams, we only have like half a season more to see, which, oh, yeah, crazy. It's making me wonder. It is definitely making me wonder. But, you know, let's get on with it. I'm not gonna lie, having previewed these games on Wednesday, or I mean Tuesday, I think that it's, not really that great of a batch of games, I guess. Kind of a mid-season lull week where, yeah, there could be some upsets for sure, but we'll see. We'll see if this week really holds anything. But like the season has been, I mean, who knows? This week could be like the biggest baffler of the season for all we know, with this. But with that, let's go and let's look at the first game, which is Texans visiting the 0-6 Panthers. This game for the Texans is honestly a must win with the way that the Jaguars have been playing, and obviously them leading the division, even though CJ Stroud has been playing, pretty well. This completion percentage is the only thing that I think about that's like lacking to me. But he's obviously distributing the ball very well. Nico Collins having a, great year as well. I think the only better rookie having a better year is Puka Nakua. But yeah, Nico Collins doing really well. Dell doing really good. Looking at the injury report, we have Robert Woods. Excuse me. We have Robert Woods, obviously out of the game with a foot injury. Sheldon Rankins out with a knee injury, and then Brevin Jordan out with a foot injury. And another wide receiver, Xavier Hutchinson, out, possibly out with a foot injury, but questionable. And then you have, another defensive tackle, Hassan Ridgeway, questionable. This, for the most part, this looks like a pretty healthy team. It does seem like they are hard pressed, depth wise, with the potential of having, them not having Robert Woods and then Xavier Hutchinson not playing at full strength. Overall, I don't think it really affects the Texans very much. I think that the Texans have done very well with Nico Collins and Dell. And then obviously their running back core, nothing crazy through 6 games, but obviously, running back by committee and 400 yards with the two of them. I do think that they need a little bit more production in the run game, at least in the terms of points. The fact that their leading backs only have 1 touchdown between the two of them kind of makes me think that they don't run the ball very well at the goal line, and they're, and that sort of thing. Even though they do have Devin Singletary, who is a hard-nosed runner and pounder. The Panthers, to me, I think, do you play for, a super high pick? Do you really? I mean, what is going on with them? Obviously, Bryce Young, I feel like, is doing fine, even though he obviously has significantly less yards than Stroud. And, Bryce Young drafted first overall, CJ Stroud, and then you have Richardson, I think were the three marquee quarterbacks that were like expected to do pretty well. But the Panthers, in my opinion, just haven't been able to find, a way in the passing game. I think that Thielen is kind of having a resurgence of his old self. I think that he needs to find other targets that aren't just going to have splashy games now and again, which is what Thielen has had. I think that the running game here is, very similar, obviously to, the Texans, where it's, two guys obviously splitting the carries, Chuba Hubbard and then Miles Sanders, obviously a little bit more from their, second back with the second most yards, obviously more carries, surprisingly. Miles Sanders seemingly not having the magic that he did on the Eagles, which, is obviously because he has a worse offensive line. But, they both teams with, a close amount of rushing yards through both backs and that sort of thing. And then you have Thielen and then Chark obviously, still very much just a deep ball threat. I really don't expect Chark to do that well in this game. I think that the Texans head coach, I forget his name, just, has this team very well coached. I think that they're going to have a passing attack that's going to get after Bryce Young. And I just don't see very many deep balls to Chark, in this game. Given that their offensive line has looked a little bit shaky. I still remember the game with the Saints the most with the Panthers, where they kind of had somewhat of a resurgence near the end of the game where they scored a touchdown. But essentially it was a breakdown of a play where Young looked a little bit like Kyler Murray to me, where he's scrambling around. He's using his small size to give himself as much time as possible, which is, one thing that I think is unique to these smaller guys, and that they can escape a lot easier than, these bigger quarterbacks and run through the blockers and expose gaps in the defense. Even with that said, though, I think the Texans are really well coached. The defense flocks to the ball a lot like the 49ers. But given that, the head coach is obviously, he was the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, does not surprise me. He's really come in there and influenced the team on what makes a defense successful and disciplined and just overall limit on yards. So I fully expect, and I mean, with Carolina being 0-6, they have some good defensive talent, I feel like. Derek Brown on the O-line, still pretty young of a D tackle, but still pretty good. Jeremy Chin, the safety, still very good. Can't really throw it deep too much against him with a guy with his range and his speed and his height. But this team overall seems to have taken a step back from last year, where they have a lot more questions, I guess, than they did last year, which is kind of surprising. But I fully expect the Texans to win this game, and I'm going to predict Texans by 10 points. Moving on, we have the Los Angeles Rams at the Dallas Cowboys. Thinking about this game, I think this is a game where the Rams can essentially or potentially prove that they are a legitimate team. I think that they actually have a very favorable matchup to them because the Cowboys have a very good pass rush, don't get me wrong. And the Rams, yeah, you kind of have like a little bit of a questionable O-line, but thinking about the Rams and their short yardage kind of play with Puka Nacua and even Cooper Kupp, who wasn't as involved last week as he was the week before when he returned. I think that Stafford can do what Stafford does best, and not throw it downfield too much, but instead throw it short, to Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and make these guys get yardage, and as well Tutu Atwell, who's been playing pretty well, I feel like, but essentially chip away at this defense, make them play up, and then potentially throw it downfield. Because Cooper Kupp, if anything, is a great hands catcher, good contested catcher, and Puka Nacua just seems to get open and create space for himself, which is why I think he's obviously, one thing that I saw this week about him is that through the first 7 games of their career, he's had over 700 yards, and there's only one other wide receiver, I guess, to have done that, and that's Ja'Marr Chase, which to me isn't too surprising because when Chase entered the league, he obviously had Joe Burrow, throw into him one of his favorite targets. But Puka Nacua has, went against all odds being a 5th round pick. And I think that, they can definitely give Dallas, some trouble. The thing that really gets me, I guess, is I think that, the Rams running game, as you can see here, Williams does have 456 yards. And I mean, Cam Akers isn't even on the team anymore. Kind of funny how they're showing him here. I think that, he can replicate some of his success here, but ultimately it's going to be kind of an uphill battle for the Rams, in my opinion, just because of the way the Cowboys are. I do think, however, that the Rams defense can, get after Prescott. You look at Dallas, and they've only have 15 sacks through 6 games. That's, 2.5 a game, 2.5 sacks a game, and that sort of thing. But you look at these offenses, obviously, converting very well. But I think that if, you can get some pressure on Dak, especially through the interior with Aaron Donald, and those guys, I think that you can ultimately, get after him, I guess, and, the Dallas has had 16 sacks to LA's 12, obviously less than 2 a game for LA, but I think that, these teams are very closely matched, and I do think that the spread being 7 is kind of warranted, but I'm only going to take the Cowboys by 3 points in this game because I think that the Rams can, get after Prescott. That's really all that I'm going to say. I think that, they know that he's going to kind of throw it quite a bit. And obviously this year it's like he's got a good amount of yards, completion percentage isn't that bad, but only 6 TDs to 4 picks. And Tony Pollard really hasn't gotten going to the extent that I'd expect him to. Obviously, like looking at this, he has under, 4 yards a carry, Yeah, obviously if he gets, 30 yards on 4 carries on Sunday or signing that sort of thing, then he's looking like he's having a pretty good year. But last year, I feel like he was, he had the most yards after breaking tackles last year, and, this team, I think when they struggle against the run, they just really, I think that Dak just can't handle the pressure. I'm not going to lie, and I find it interesting that they can't really pass the ball very well, this year. Like has a good completion percentage, but they can't pass for touchdowns seemingly, which is kind of mind-boggling to me. I think that I think that the Rams have a good defense. And I think that, given that the way the Rams operate on offense, I think that they can definitely chew away at the clock and limit the Cowboys' opportunities. On the flip side, the reason I am going with the Cowboys is because I do think the pass rush can definitely get to Stafford. But that's why I think McVay is going to have to do some creative, things on offense where he's having Stafford get rid of the ball quickly, which I think he'll do because he's not a dumb coach to put Stafford at risk. But even with that, yeah, Cowboys by 3. I think this is going to be a close game. I think this is one of the few good games in the week. And the other thing, too, is the Rams, even though they're visiting Dallas, I think that they feel like they could win this game. In this game, they could definitely, make things hard for the Cowboys because looking at their division, obviously, Seattle's coming off of a win last week. And then you also have, the Niners who have lost 2 straight. Who thinks that? But, potentially, who knows if the troubles for the Niners keep up, this team could be sneaky and making its comeback in the middle of the year. But yeah, I think that this looks like to be one of the better matchups this week and more important games, of course. But I guess, I'll look at the injury report real quick. Hunter Long, not big there, and no major injuries. Questionable is Tyron Smith. If he doesn't play, that is huge, but I think overall the Cowboys would be fine if, Tyron Smith didn't play, even though he's one of the better O-linemen that they have, especially at tackle. But moving on to the next game, we've got the Minnesota Vikings visiting my Packers. I actually think with the Vikings visiting the Packers, I think that this is kind of a must-win game, I guess, for my Packers. Last week at Denver, I went to the game and I watched it, and it just looked like the same old thing where the Packers don't score in the first half, but overall, I think this is a game that my Packers can win. The Vikings played on Monday night, and they played against the Niners. And even though the Niners didn't look themselves, and they definitely, Brock Purdy definitely had some throws, that were really questionable. A couple of interceptions to the Vikings, to a Vikings defense that hasn't been that great, to be honest with you. And you look at this, this year, it said that they have the 21st ranked defense, which isn't good. But, the Packers, it doesn't seem to matter who they play. They haven't really been able to score since week 1. And even week 1, they didn't really explode until the second half. Like, it was a close game at the beginning of the half, and I was like, what's going to happen in this game? And they exploded the second half. So it's like, if the second half Packers can show up for even if it's not even the first quarter, like let's say they have the first quarter Packers that do nothing, but then they have 3 straight quarters where they respond. I think this team wins most times because they're like it's like around 8. It's like an 18-point second half average or something or whatever. Obviously that's not really a logical way to swing it, but they've scored 20 in the second half. They've scored 17 in the second half, and it's kind of averaging out to be like right around 18. But I think that, and one thing that I've heard this week is that apparently all the skill position players for the offense met up in the meeting room and all watched film together. And I guess, I assume that they do that anyway, but I'm assuming this is kind of a specialized thing, but they want to solve this thing. I am certain that the Packers, just aren't used to having this kind of thing, and that the culture there has been to always win. And obviously quite a young team, newer players this year that can't even remember the regime of the last, few years, where it's like before last year, Packers were contenders. But so, that culture just doesn't evaporate overnight. And it's the same offensive coordinator and head coach type of thing. And many people are screaming for LaFleur's job. They're saying to bench Love. They're saying to, fire Barry still, even though the Packers have had trouble kind of not giving up chunk plays at times, but for the most part have been very stout in terms of the points they give up, which me as a fan, I'm okay with. If they're, if a team drives 50 yards from the 25-yard line, you know, and they're at the other 25 and they're forced to kick a field goal. That is something that it's like a momentum changer. You go 50 yards, essentially, 2/3 of the distance you need to go down the field because Carlson always forces a touchback. You just feel I feel like you would feel deflated as an offense. As a person who hasn't ever really played football at any level but has watched it for quite some time, you're not really happy with 3 points. I'm sorry, in today's league, you are trying to score right away and make your opponent uncomfortable because they haven't even had the ball, but it looks like you could run away with the game, and it makes your defense even more pumped up. It's hard to get pumped up off of a field goal. Obviously, I mean, if you score a touchdown and then field goals the rest of the game, like, the Broncos, they only had 1 TD, but they had a ton of field goals. And they ended up, with 19 points. And that's how much they had. 1 TD, which was like a blown coverage. And, on the Packers that it looked like. And then a bunch of field goals. Without that, with only 4 field goals in a game, you're really not going to win much with 12 points. But I just think that, and I mean, obviously I'm kind of I wouldn't say I'm conflicted with me being a fan, but I see the team and what's going on, and I can say with as much of a neutral standpoint as I can have, that this team can do well if they were to even just get 1 touchdown in the first half. Because if you're scoring like 24 a game, with the way the defense has been playing, you can win most games. The only team that I think scored quite a bit more was the and maybe not even quite a bit more, I guess, but 10 points more was the Lions. And that game was just a slaughter, where it's like the Lions are seeking to prove their dominance in the North and, set the record straight that they are the team to beat in the division. And I mean, the other thing too is the Vikings are coming off 3 straight wins. I don't think that's going to make them like overconfident, but I do think Kirk Cousins has been playing a little bit better. There's still some things that I don't like that I see from him, essentially giving up on plays or, barely escaping the pocket and some risky throwaways, I guess, or even things like near receivers where it's like he almost got called for an intentional grounding. I feel like he should have been called for it, especially after the breakdown. And he's definitely been playing better, but looking at the season he's having, he's obviously thrown, he's leading the league in touchdowns on passing, which I think is remarkable considering that his top target seems to be Addison, who seems to sneak and slither away, and teams lose him. He gets all of, a lot of these where he's just kind of snuck away, and obviously the Packers aren't going to have to deal with Jefferson this game. Probably a good thing too. I'm not sure if Jair Alexander is playing. Obviously the last matchup that these two, Jefferson and Jair had last year, Jair gritted on him early, but he still backed it up. And after carving up the Packers last year in week 1, he did virtually nothing in the second game, and the Packers owned the Vikings. And it was crazy because after then, Jefferson just seemingly couldn't do very well. He couldn't do very well, I guess, type of thing, the rest of the year. And then they were a first round exit in the playoffs because, I mean, they had a bad defense, and I mean, their offense was proven to be, that their offense could be shut down. But I guess another player that's, kind of surprised me and is kind of doing his thing now is Madison. I did not believe that when they moved on from Dalvin Cook that they were like, oh, we believe Madison, can do the same things. And he doesn't do the same things, but he still seems to be a very smart runner, and sometimes that's all you need as a running back, being able to know where to move, how to move to give your line and get the blocks you need. Kind of like a Le'Veon Bell, because, we all know that Le'Veon Bell had a terrible 40, wasn't the speediest guy, but he was a smart runner when he was on Pittsburgh. But overall, I do think that, the Vikings, the main thing that I see with them is that they don't really do short yardage runs very much. Obviously, they traded for Cam Akers to, I think, kind of fill that, because Madison is not a run up the gut kind of guy. He doesn't have power, and he doesn't really have the size either. So they got Akers to kind of fill that. Because Dalvin Cook before, even though he was a speedy, slippery guy, he could at least pound it, because he had decent size. But yeah, looking at the season, Love, obviously 2 weeks in a row, has had 2 interceptions, to end, the offense's game, essentially. And, looking at the rushing, it's crazy that you don't see Aaron Jones here, because he's been hurt. He hasn't been at full capacity. He did play last week, but he didn't really have too many touches, for catches and runs type of thing. But I do think that A.J. Dillon was playing better last week. I think that the blocking has improved for him. I think that was the main component for why he struggled early, because too many guys were slipping by linemen, and you can't get it going if you're immediately contacted after the ball is handed off 2 yards behind the line. Like, it just doesn't happen with any running back in the league, but I do think that, the wide receiver core definitely needs to look a bit better. I do like what Dobbs has been doing. Love has been trying to distribute the ball. I believe the leading reception leader for the Packers is Luke Musgrave, the tight end. Then you have Dobbs and Reed with both over 200 yards, but they really haven't gotten Watson involved too much, as the guy that's supposed to have incredible speed. To me, with Watson, you kind of saw it when they plugged in Love last season against the Eagles, where, Watson essentially ran a drag and then ran around the entire defense with his speed. A defense that was, arguably one of the best in the NFL last year. But, I think that, another component of why the Packers have struggled is because the healthiness of the team hasn't been there. And we're going to go look, I guess, at the injury report. I really want to see what it is. I do think I looked this over, that sort of thing. But, looking at this, the Vikings have a running back in Wangu, not in, and then Brian Asamoah, out, so really not that much. Oh, and then, Ezra Cleveland being questionable, this is kind of I wouldn't say like a huge blow, but I think Ezra Cleveland is a pretty solid guard, and the Vikings do have a pretty good O-line. Obviously, you think of their best, being their tackles and being O'Neal and Darrisaw, but looking at the Packers, questionable is Luke Musgrave, Josh Myers, Devondre Campbell, and then, like I said, Jair is here. But the thing that I think about is in this last week, the Packers did put Darnell Savage and Eric Stokes on IR. So Eric Stokes, apparently his hammy, it's crazy because he had an ankle injury, which is why he was out most of this year, since like week 9 of last year, I believe. And now he's got a hammy that they warranted to take and put him on IR, which really sucks for him, obviously, in his 3rd year. And that he's just trying to get back. But it sucks that Jair, I guess, isn't full strength. If you have Jair against this Vikings team, he's been really scrappy against the Vikings. I think it's a team that he knows that the Packers can beat, and he always plays, really, really scrappy against them. And, knows that Kirk Cousins is liable for picks, most of the time. He has been playing better, though. But overall, I think that this is a really good sign, that you have Watson, who is off the injury report for the first time. He's been kind of questionable. He has been playing the last 2 games, but he's been questionable. So hopefully he is finally full strength. Elton Jenkins being off of it is huge. Obviously, Aaron Jones being off of it is huge as well. So hopefully he's full strength, because this is looking like a game to me. Like, the Vikings obviously want to win it. They want to get above, to the 500. And the Packers, they know that the Vikings have been having success. And I think the Packers know that they only need to, get over this offensive slump in order to turn their season around, because the defense is playing really, really well, contrary to what most people are saying about, the defense, because they're not giving up a lot of points. And I think that they can do really, really well against the Vikings. I think that I think that they have the pass rush to do it. I think that they have, the linemen and the linebackers to, back them up and play well enough in the run. I think that it's really good, I guess, that, I really hope that Musgrave can go. The hit that he took last week obviously suspended the player that I guess has been dirty this year. That was his second time that he's done this sort of thing, and they suspended him for 4 games. But Musgrave, it'd be sad to miss him. I think that they can kind of get over it, but Musgrave, another one of those players that if they have him and Watson out, that is 2 high-flying speed guys that how are you going to account for both of them? Assuming that they call the right plays on the Packers, which is the reason why I'm going to lead up to my final conclusion. I think that the Vikings win this game. I hate to say it, because I really want my Pack to rebound, off of this losing streak. But my Packers have been on a losing streak. They haven't been playing well. It's like a three straight losses, I believe. And I'm going to predict the Vikings by 4 points is what I'm going to predict, because there's just something that tells me, and I mean, it's kind of oddball here that they do 22-20 type of thing, and but they have a -1 point arrow. So it's like, they're calling it a 1-point game, which means that the analytics and the spread think that it's an even game, even though the Vikings just beat arguably one of the best teams in the NFL. Obviously, they were without Debo, and they still barely lost and had a chance to win that. But it's kind of mind-boggling to me, and I think that I don't know if rivalry plays a role into it, but it's like the Packers and Vikings have been doing this dance for a while where it can go one way or the other, and that's why I'm kind of giving it to the Vikings, because I do think that, with the rush they have and the win streak, I think that they're trying to get back in the mix of things. And I mean, interestingly enough, in the NFC, one other thing that I'd like to mention about this game is that the Packers apparently, the 7th seed right now, I guess, is the Buccaneers. I guess I don't know if it is still with the game. Wait a minute, where is it? Oh, do they not show it here? Okay. They must not show the... All right, they must not show the Thursday night game, interestingly enough. But the Buccaneers obviously lost, and they were the current NFC 7th seed last week at 3-3. So, depending on how the season ends out, you could be a 10-win team and make the playoffs, it seems, pretty easily in the NFC. Because obviously it's a lot more top heavy in the NFC, and you're kind of, a lot of teams can, I mean, obviously I don't think anyone's been mathematically eliminated yet, obviously with that close of a margin, but we'll see. This game is going to, set the team on the right course. And I think if the Vikings fall to 3-5 and then the Packers are rising to 3-4, who knows? And I mean, I guess I don't know when the Vikings bye is, but obviously they haven't had a bye week yet, and the Packers obviously have, but maybe fatigue plays a slight role because this team's obviously they've played 7 games so far, whereas the Packers have only played 6, and they just played on Monday night, so they have a little bit less of a rest time period than the Packers would have had. But yeah, I'm still going Vikings by 4, even though I don't want to be honest with you, just because I want to be realistic. And that if the Packers have the same kind of offense, I do think the Vikings score, more than the Packers can overcome in the second half. That's just my opinion. But moving on, we have the Saints going to the Colts. The Colts, it is kind of crazy, I guess, should have won last week. It was nuts that they competed with the Browns. I don't know how it became such an offensive shootout, but it's mind-boggling because, you look at Cleveland and they have the number 1 defense, and they have, Myles Garrett, who has had like the highest PFF pass rusher grade. And I mean, he's such a beast. He's such a talent, type of thing. And if the Colts can do that against any team, I think that they can win this game. I think that, the fact that they give the Saints obviously a 2-point, prediction score, is a little warranted. Obviously, last week could end up becoming an anomaly. But Minshew, good God, how, so much swag. Maybe, I mean, it's crazy to say because Minshew was kind of the Jacksonville wonder before Lawrence showed up, and obviously took the job just because he was the number 1 overall pick and the best draft prospect we've ever seen. But God, Minshew making his case that maybe he should be a starter in the right system or on the right team. Or maybe he stole some of Purdy's magic where it's like, oh, Minshew, the guy that, many people have kind of forgotten about, from years ago, where it's like, doesn't have a big arm, like, and Purdy like that. I mean, don't get me wrong, Purdy can throw it kind of downfield, but he doesn't really have to with the team he's on. But it's like, maybe Minshew should get a chance somewhere. And this is with guys that it's like, you've got Downs, who is the promising young player, Michael Pittman, who is still, a very serviceable wide receiver. And I think that the Colts, it's kind of nuts that they have like the 9th ranked offense now in the league right now. And obviously that game last week, kind of makes them look like a potentially dangerous team. If I don't think that they have the best defense at all, to be honest with you, but and obviously, the rushing yards, those will start to return. And I mean, I'm sure Jonathan Taylor is, playing fine type of thing, but this is an offense that has obviously scored, quite a bit more than New Orleans, and New Orleans has had a lot of struggles offensively this year. Penalties pretty even. Total yards allowed. Obviously, Indy has not been that good on defense, but against a struggling offense, they might be able to have their game where they show that they can at least, be serviceable against, a struggling offense, type of thing. But New Orleans, the one thing I'll say is that they have a very scrappy defense, but you could say the same thing against the Browns, and the Browns are probably better in terms of, complete personnel. Like, I mean, I do think that Lattimore is probably better than any Browns DB, but then you think about the tandem and Denzel Ward, gosh, why can't I remember his name? Greg Newsome are probably the better cornerback tandem on the Browns. But, and Indy obviously has more sacks than New Orleans, I had this backwards. I was looking at this wrong. They have more sacks than New Orleans does. So, maybe you can get after Derek Carr, type of thing. But yeah, I think that the Colts, even though they're given the deficit, I'm actually going to give them the win in this game. I mean, you even look at Carr, and it's similar to Prescott, where it's like 6 TDs, 4 interceptions. That's not really that promising through 7 games. You know, I don't think this is what they envisioned when they traded for him, or I mean, signed him, or, you know, type of thing. And it's kind of nuts because you've had your wide receiver core healthy. You've had Olave, who, I mean, obviously hasn't had injury problems, but you've also had Michael Thomas. You know, I get it that you haven't had Kamara, you know, until after week 4 and week 5, but it's kind of no excuse to me. You know, you prepared to not have them for 4 games, but let's look at this. They have, I guess, Taysom Hill, Jimmy Graham. A lot of questionable here. Demario Davis, this is not good. This will definitely help the Colts in the running game at least. And yeah, Tyrann Mathieu, and then Marcus May as well. This does not look like a very insanely healthy defense where they have, you know, a couple of O linemen. Jimmy Graham, who I guess has looked like he's had a resurgence in his career with his first team, the Saints. But Taysom Hill, you know, adding that aspect of just wildness, I guess, is the term I'll use. I think that, you know, if Derek Carr is going to shoulder the load, he's going to have to carry this team this game. And I just don't see it because I haven't seen it all year. But looking at the Colts, you know, you've got Braden Smith, Kylan Granson, tight end, and Juju Brents. Not that many injuries, but then you also do have Zach Moss, who I think is a fine running back. I think if he could get going, or, you know, they use him in more short yardage situations with the return of Jonathan Taylor. But Eric Johnson and Tony Brown, so not that many injuries on the Colts, you know, so it's not going to affect the game that much. But if this defense is starting to get banged up because of age for the, you know, Saints, it's even more prevalent that Derek Carr carries them. And the thing the whole motto I've had of his career is inconsistency. Derek Carr has not proven to be a consistent quarterback. There have been years where he has started red hot and he just fizzles out, and then he's out of the conversation of a potential MVP. I know there has been very few years, like he's, you know, 9 years into his career now, but he's had the times where it's like, oh, look at how great he could be. And then it just collapses the next game. You know, inconsistency at its best, which is why I think they can't do well in the red zone, because when you're inconsistent and then you're given limited space, teams, you know, tend to know that, you know, if they make you have to make like a really, really tough throw, you're just not going to do it every single time. And it's hard to be successful if you can't be good in the red zone. So I'm actually going to give the Colts a 3-point advantage for this game. But moving on, we have the Patriots against the Dolphins. The Patriots are going to lose this game. I don't think there's going to be any, oh yeah, we beat the Bills last week, let's show the Dolphins how good we can be. I think the Dolphins this time around could really, you know, blow through the Patriots. I don't know if the Patriots are going to do, because like their last game, obviously, it was 24-17. New England played like a 3-deep safety look like all game on defense to limit their points. But if you have an offense that can't put up points like the New England Patriots have, how are you ever going to win? But, you know, who knows? Maybe Belichick is like, oh, you can't fire me. I'm going to do an insane resurgence. But I just highly doubt it. I think that Mac Jones was playing for his job last week. Not to say he's not going to be doing the same this week, because but I mean, the thing is that the Bills are arguably the best in this division. This division is kind of funny. I mean, I used to think that the Dolphins were the best, but with their shaky defense, it's kind of bleh. And in New England, this doesn't have that much of an offense. I'm just going to say it. They don't have that much of an offense. Looking at the stats, looking at the Patriots, it's like, I guess a good amount of passing yards, but 7 TDs to 7 picks does not scream good to me. And it's like when your best wide receiver is Bourne, who I like Bourne, but I just am not convinced he's like the guy. He hasn't convinced it of me. With only 370 yards through 7 games. Essentially averaging just over 50 yards a game. And I mean, Hunter Henry's a serviceable tight end, but obviously, not that much threat here. And, Stevenson and Elliott racking up to essentially just below 500 yards rushing. I mean, nothing crazy there. And it's odd because they are like the same, I wouldn't say the exact same style of back, but Stevenson's a hard to bring down guy who's the workhorse back. And then you have Elliott. What for? But yeah, you got the Dolphins who, their leading wide receiver has nearly 3 times the amount of yards that, the other leading receiver on the other team has. But yeah, I'm going to give this game to the Dolphins, and I'm going to say it's a 10-point victory. Moving on. We have Jets, Giants. Now, this is a game where I'm going to look at the injury report because I did not care about who's injured on the, on the injury report for the Dolphins, to be honest, or the Patriots. And it's like, yeah, look at this team. They're banged up. And then it's like looking at this, nobody's out who I care about. If they have Hill and Waddle, they're set for offense. And then, defense. I mean, Ramsey hasn't played yet. He's just working his way back. But yeah, looking at this game, we have Charles, the wide receiver, doubtful. Who knows who this guy is? Backup. No offense. Out is Joe Tippmann, an O lineman, but we all know that the Jets don't really have a good O lineman, even with their starting 5 for the most part. But then you also have Randall Cobb, shoulder, Will McDonald, and then Michael Carter, 2 hamstring. This is kind of big. Maybe not that big, to be honest with you, especially like the Giants, because like the strength of the Jets is their front 7. It's their front 7. Obviously, you do have Sauce Gardner, and then you have a pretty good DBs. Like they are a really good defense, but they're the strength of this defense for the past few years is their linebackers and linemen, led by Quinnen Williams, who's just an absolute stud. And then you have the Giants, the O-line that, who knows, the O-line that fails. I think it's kind of funny that they do only give the Jets like a 2-point lead here. I mean, the only reason I'll say otherwise probably is because their offense is kind of inconsistent. I think that Zach Wilson hasn't been throwing the game away, but obviously, looking at this, he hasn't been too consistent. I think that they do lean on Breece Hall. But I will say that the Giants definitely have a serviceable a defense, that is, probably a little bit above average, but I'm not going to give them too much credit. I think that Garrett Wilson's having a great year. The Wilson to Wilson connection. And then you have Conklin, but otherwise not much from anywhere else on this team. I think of, the veterans like Cobb and Lazard, who are obviously, came from the Packers. And overall, I just don't think that they get the ball very much. I think that the inconsistencies with the line is hard to scheme up any guys getting open. Even a guy with sure hands like Lazard, in his size. But I think that this team can lean on the run, make Breece Hall your weapon of the game. Whether it be through play action and some screens. I think he does really well with screens. He's got great speed, and he's hard to bring down. And run it outside, because I really think that, Sexy Dexty is, quite a player to go up against in the interior. And like I said, the Jets don't have, that great of an O-line. But looking at the Giants, I do need to check to see if Daniel Jones is actually playing. Okay, he is not playing. Tyrod Taylor, interestingly enough, played really well last week. And doubtful Andrew Thomas, I am almost going to say that he is not going to go. I don't think that they're going to risk it. I think that the Giants are, they're going to protect him. I don't think that they're really going to risk the potential for a long-term injury, and especially in the legs of their star lineman, who's supposed to be a star. But questionable is Darren Waller, had a huge game last week. Evan Neal is still banged up. And then you have Kayvon Thibodeau, not good. Adoree Jackson with a neck injury, never good. But yeah, this is a Giants team that is missing potentially and has potential starters hurt. I just don't know if the Giants can really pull off what they did last week. And the Jets, interestingly enough, if they can win and improve to 4-3, things are looking up for them. I guess the nuts thing about it is what happens in this game if you have Zach Wilson not play very well against a defense that isn't like super stingy, but they are, a pretty good defense that you can definitely look bad against if you're not paying attention. Like, I think that they are a sneaky defense that, yeah, they're not as flashy as like the Niners, Cowboys, or Browns, but they're a pretty sound defense, with a pretty good coach in DeBoer. But yeah, the Jets, I think I'm gonna give this game to them, not by much. Obviously this is kind of a thing, or whatever else. And I guess the one thing I'll say about the Giants is, how well is Saquon going to be able to do to carry you? So it's on Tyrod Taylor again, type of thing. And, Waller is kind of hurt. And then your next best is Slayton with only 18 receptions through 7 games. But yeah, I'm going to give this game to the Jets. And it's interesting to me that I guess it says 26 here for the Giants defense, but they've really been subject for how, and they've essentially went prone through their offensive failures and the O-line never being able to block for the wide receivers for the quarterback for the most part. But the Jets, I think, can get after Tyrod. I think that they can get at him in more ways than one, through their linebackers, through their front four. And I'm going to give the Jets a 3-point advantage in this game. Because, yeah, I don't fully believe in Zach Wilson, even though I think that Garrett Wilson could carve this team a new one, and that's the leg up that I think that they have. But yeah, New York Jets by 3 over the Giants. Moving on, we have Jaguars Steelers. A kind of interesting game here. I think that the Jaguars have kind of proven that they are the best in their division finally. We're finally seeing Trevor Lawrence playing the way he needs to. Not the number of touchdowns I really want from him, but they did seemingly be struggling a lot early in the year on offense. And now they're kind of, wouldn't say they're scoring at will, but they're scoring a good amount of points. Looking at Pittsburgh, Matt Canada, was kind of being questioned for how bad his offense was. And then last week they go out and they score a bunch. I'm trying to remember the teams that these teams played last week. Kind of funny that I remember the outcome, but not the actual score. Yeah, they beat the Rams. And it's crazy to me because the Rams obviously have been having a very good offensive game, but the Pittsburgh does have a very good defense. It's one of those things that, I was talking with my guy at Goodyear who's a Pittsburgh fan, and he's like, "Oh, we don't use our players right. We we drafted Washington and he hasn't seen the field and he was supposed to be one of the premier tight ends or whatever. And then he's like, we don't use Najee Harris to run it up the gut and pound it like the competitor he is with the size he has. And it sounds to me like, the Pittsburgh's got a case of the Packers in a way where it's like, oh yeah, use the guys that are, the best playmakers for your team. But yeah, use the guys that are best playmakers for the team. And I think if they can beat LA, they can win this game against Jacksonville. I think Pittsburgh has a very good defense. I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to have to be careful because a lot of the times in the games he's played, he hasn't thrown it away, but he'll make throws that ultimately cost them the game that are incompletions. And Pittsburgh's defense is no joke. But yeah, looking at Jacksonville and who they played last week, yeah, they played New Orleans, who have a very stout defense as well. To argue who has the better defense, New Orleans or Pittsburgh, I would actually argue that I think Pittsburgh has a better defense. I think that their DBs, even Tracy Porter Jr. has been playing lights out. And it's not like the Jacksonville has too many weapons that are like insanely proven on this team. But, this is one of the rare games this week that I think, Pittsburgh is unfavored by a little bit, which I get, but I think that Pittsburgh can really start to kind of prove that they are a name in their division again. I think that Pickett, Benny say he regressed, but like with the struggles that they've had offensively and with still a somewhat subpar O-line, I think it's understandable. But, looking at his year, he's obviously had a 60% completion percentage, nothing to sing home about, but only 5 picks to 4 TDs. And then you have Najee Harris, like I said, that it's like not a ton of yards per carry, but the same thing can be said of Warren in a sense, like 3.5 for him or something like that. But yeah, you've had George Pickens, who's he's a baller. This guy is, he can be a great wide receiver. And I think that he just has the speed that just get him the ball, just get him the ball. He's that kind of guy where it's like, he can run circles around defenses, but the Jaguars also, to me, you look at this and you look at the similarities through yards is that Kirk has the most with 474, Ridley with the second most, but you do have, Warren's got the second most, but only 165. So, Pickens has been their guy. And, I think that there is some injuries to be said about this game. The Jaguars, Zay Jones still out. He seemed to be a target that Lawrence liked. He has now, been out, some weeks in a row. I guess Trevor Lawrence is questionable. He's going to play. This is a smoke screen. His knee is probably still injured, but he played fine against the Saints. And then you look at this, and Brandon Scherff with an ankle injury. This is not a good sign to me. And then Andre Cisco as well being, with a hammy, even if he plays, hammies are tough. And especially on defense where you've got to be high flying to the ball. Any shortness in range is going to affect the end result of you limiting the offense or potentially giving up a big play. And Tyson Campbell as well, having a hammy, not good. But yeah, looking at the Steelers, I guess Joey Porter has a calf injury and Levi Wallace with a foot. Both, Joey Porter obviously having an incredible defensive rookie season, maybe even better than Sauce, knock on wood. But he's been playing excellent. And Levi Wallace has always just been kind of a staunch, desired cornerback who had also played for the Bills, and they couldn't keep him because he just plays too well as like a slot guy, or as a slot corner, I believe. But, looking at the Steelers, they're mostly healthy, which good for them, but somewhat banged up and some key players, for the Jaguars. The Jaguars, I think, are going to feel the pressure of Pittsburgh, and I'm only going to give the Jaguars a 1-point advantage over Pittsburgh because of that. I think that the defense is going to do better at getting after Lawrence than the Saints were. And I think that is mainly because of, guess who? TJ Watt, who, top 5 pass rusher right now this year, with no surprise. He's always been a very feisty and, crazy work ethic player. But yeah, I'm only giving Jacksonville a 1-point advantage because I think that this game could go either way. Assuming that Matt Canada doesn't go back to the way he was running things, and I mean, if he plays the same kind of game that he did against the Rams, I think that he can win, because I think that the Jaguars have not as good a defense as the Rams do, to be honest with you. Moving on, we have Falcons in Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't lead me to believe that they're going to do jack. I think that they are one of those teams that, depending on how they feel about their starting, depending on how they feel about their starting, about Tannehill, obviously, in the future, which I think that the cat is out of the bag with Tannehill. They obviously drafted Malik Willis, and then they also drafted, I can't remember his name. I cannot remember his name, to be honest with you. Where's QB here? Will Levis, that's right. So they have Malik Willis and Will Levis. Kind of funny, the double Will combo. But, Tannehill's obviously up there in age. I don't really know, what to think about him. Malik Willis is obviously, he was drafted to kind of be the guy. He didn't play. Ryan Tannehill openly said he wasn't going to trade him or train him. And then they go and they draft Will Levis, and maybe just a pick to be like, oh yeah, we're going to draft this guy because they thought he was going to go in the first round. But apparently some attitude issues potentially is why, Will Levis dropped so much, so it's kind of interesting, especially, being that he's a 24-year-old rookie. It just, number 33 overall, obviously, first pick in the second round. And it's just interesting for me to think that why would he still be the third if they weren't planning on using Willis? And there's no way that they're going to use this guy as a career backup. You don't draft a guy in a second round for that. So it's like the Tennessee Titans seemingly, to me, they either don't know what they're doing or the cat is out of the bag. And that potentially, they might go for a QB next year, which would be mind-boggling. But at this point, it's like, this seems to be a team that they don't know who they're certain at with QB, or maybe it's, their head coach. Maybe he doesn't, he ends up not liking these guys, so he's like, oh, I don't want to work with this guy. I don't want this guy to be my starting QB. But, looking at the Falcons, concussion protocol for Ty Davis, and then Bud Dupree questionable, very healthy team overall. And then you look at, Ryan Tannehill out, and then Roger McCreary out with a hammy, not good. And, those are two big blows to this team, but, yeah, Tennessee, they're definitely losing this game. I think that Bijan Robinson is going to cut them a new one, where it's like, what more do I have to say? The Falcons, playing pretty sound on defense. I would never guess that they were the 5th ranked, going into this week. But yeah, their offense has been pretty good. Stagnant at times, but they are also young. And then you have Ritter, who, It's like I said that last week. Oh, they don't win unless Ritter doesn't commit mistakes. And guess what? Ritter didn't make that many mistakes last week when they played. They played the Commanders, I believe, last week. Correct? Yeah, they played the Commanders last week. Or no, it was Tampa Bay. That's right. Okay, so yeah, and they beat Tampa Bay, who I thought would be a lot stouter, and they obviously were stout, but they didn't, do very well on offense. But Atlanta, I mean, they have all the reason to think that they can win this division because you have the Panthers who are, winless, and then you have the Bucks who you obviously just beat, and then you have the Saints who have been kind of stumbling back and forth, obviously 3-4. If they, and in New Orleans, a possibility that they lose this game and you can pull even farther ahead as Atlanta, but even with a win, you still stretch your advantage to 2 games, because you're 2 games above 500, whereas New Orleans, they would be 500 type of thing, obviously, but yeah, the crazy thing to think about the Falcons, and then you have the Titans who don't have. I mean, I guess the Titans have a pretty good defense, surprisingly, but no offense. And I don't know what to think about what is, going to happen with them. Apparently, they're not going to trade Derrick Henry. It's kind of interesting. And Hopkins really, I think he had that one game where he, looked like a flashback of the past, but he hasn't had a touchdown yet. It doesn't sell me on the Titans. But the Falcons, London, Smith, and then even Kyle Pitts did well last week and had an impact. So yeah, I'm gonna go Falcons by 7 in this game. Moving on, we have Eagles Commanders, a NFC divisional matchup. The Commanders looking bad last week. But then you look at, their October 1st meeting where Philadelphia barely made it by the Commanders. Quite a game. Obviously, divisional blood, so it's one of those things that you never know what to expect, with these games. I don't know how you can say that the Commanders have the 31st defense. I guess maybe it's with the points they've allowed on defense. But yeah, let me see here. Fumbles on interception thrown or whatever. Total yards allowed. I guess Washington has allowed a ton of yards. Passing yards allowed. They've only allowed 1,700 through 7 games, so that's not anything insane. I do think that this, like I've said before, the Commanders have a good D-line. The guys on their line, Sweat and Young, are very scrappy and aggressive and able to get to the quarterback and play very physical. I think that's another reason why they were able to kind of, I guess they didn't really stand up too well, to the Eagles. They both teams scored over 30, but in Washington, that's obviously score 190. But I think that this team, could be a lot better if their pass rush was a bit more consistent, but, looking at this, both a lot of sacks from each team, 3 a game, essentially, with, each team having played 7, but, Philadelphia's defense has seemingly, they seem to be having guys that are, getting good stats, type of thing, but they're not playing as well as they did last year. Like, last year, they would definitely not be giving up a 40% on 3rd down. It's crazy to think that Washington, but this is why, divisional games are so hard to call. They really don't say that the Commanders are going to, they really don't give the Commanders a chance here, even though it's like, oh, you match up well, and that sort of thing. I mean, let's look at the injury report real quick and then I'll, kind of see. So Jordan Davis still has the hammy problem, and then Bradley Roby is still out. He hasn't been playing for weeks. Out is Deke, Charles, and then Cody Barton, the linebacker, young linebacker. But overall, I don't think any impact players like Curtis Samuel being questionable is kind of unfortunate, but like the Commanders get it done with other wide receivers. I think Howell, distributes the ball well. I think as long as you have Scary Terry, you're gonna have viable wide receiver threat because Scary Terry's scary and nothing's gonna really change that anytime soon, probably. But well, I do think that Philadelphia comes away with this game. I just think that the offense has been definitely getting more traction. I guess anyway. Hurts has been looking off and on. But Swift has been having a phenomenal year. I think that they can use him a lot as like a smokescreen where he, is running outside and making and easing the pressure off of Hurts. Because I do think Hurts, I mean, even though they have they had one of the best O-lines last year, he's been getting pressured this year where he's been having to run, quite a bit, I guess. But I see the Eagles winning, but I see it as a game, that could definitely be a struggle. And I think that, Washington is having kind of their ups and downs with Howell, but I think Howell is the guy. I think he just has to clean up a little bit. And, then, I mean, he runs the ball pretty well, and he's a big guy. Reminds me a little bit of Hurts without the speed, I guess. He's just not as fast, but looking at this, even Scary Terry through 7 games, 432 yards, and then the next 310. Obviously, Howell is distributing the ball well. He's distributing the ball well. But moving on from that, I'm going to give Philadelphia the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say Philadelphia by 4 in this game. Next thing we have Cleveland Browns at the Seattle Seahawks. I think that this is going to be a nasty game for Seattle. It's kind of interesting to me, I guess, that Cleveland is not favored in this game. I don't know why. They have, you do have the tandem with Seattle with Rick Woolen and Witherspoon, where Witherspoon, I think, after last week was the highest graded DB or something in the NFC. But I just don't see that being that much of a thing. I mean, and I guess I have no idea. I guess if Deshaun Watson's playing, let's see this. No, he's still out. And then you have poor Jedrick Wills. Jedrick Wills, their young star tackle, being hurt is not good. Marquise Goodwin, with a back injury, not good, but, somewhat banged up team. The Seahawks, though, questionable is Lockett and Adams. Not good. Not good to me. I think that these two injuries don't really matter too much. You still have DK Metcalf and Kenneth Walker, the third, fully healthy. And the Browns, the thing about the Browns I think gives them the edge is that Geno Smith is not going to be able to get away from Myles Garrett. It's like it all comes down to how good you are at scheming guys open quickly. But the Browns defense is a monster, and it's kind of interesting, but last week they kind of dodged a bullet in a game that they probably should have lost. A call kind of gave them the game at the end. That was a controversial call. I don't really have my own opinion on it, but yeah, it was that sort of thing. But I find it interesting that it's not a negative 1 point spread. And that they're favoring Seattle this much, because even though the Browns, Watson's not playing, he wasn't playing great before he went out. And, Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore have kind of proven that they are enough to carry this wide receiver group, But PJ Walker, hasn't been playing terrible either. Like, he's not going to risk the game, I guess. I will say that Kenneth Walker's been having a great year. But I don't know, the Browns defense is just so good. They are so good. And then both of these offenses have obviously been subpar. But if the Browns can even replicate like 3/4 of what they did last week, then they can do really well. Obviously, they're up against a way better defense. But we kind of looked at the Colts, and the Colts, they seemingly have a pretty decent defense as well. So, who knows with this game? I do want to give it to the Browns because I just think that they're not going to be able to protect Geno Smith well enough, and not that he hasn't thrown beautiful balls this year, but I think that, he's definitely susceptible to getting sacked, in the times that I've seen him, where it's like he doesn't always have a clean pocket, and he's definitely like, he's just not really that fast when he scrambles away. And Myles Garrett is just relentless. It is hard for me to bet against a guy like that is a game wrecker. And even though the Seahawks have a good defense, I don't think they really have that game wrecker player that makes me think that, like, the Browns can have a good amount of time and a lot easier time on offense. So I'm actually going to give the Browns a 3-point advantage, controversial to this, over Seattle. Ravens against the Cardinals. We'll quickly look at the injury, and I'll kind of give what I think about this game. Marcus Williams isn't playing. Who do they obviously have Hollywood Brown on Arizona, but, Kyler Murray is, I guess, still doubtful. He's not going to be playing, so they're going to have Dobbs, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, Greg George, Antonio Hamilton, Jalen Thompson, questionable. Doesn't really matter to me. I'm giving this game to the Ravens. I think the Ravens, eat the Cardinals for dinner, with obviously just an overwhelming performance where, Lamar Jackson is playing at I would actually say at an MVP level. He's obviously got close to 2,000 yards, all-purpose yards, 71% completion rating, which is, really solid. And then they have, a solid running game. Him and Edwards, over 700 yards. And then you've got, Zay Flowers that has, been money. Hopefully they can get him more involved. I think that he is a lethal player, and he just looks like the kind of guy that you can just milk the ball to, and he's going to, do crazy things against the defenses. And Mark Andrews, I've always loved. What a baller. I don't think he gets enough appreciation, to be honest with you. But a solid red zone threat with a guy that you can just have work over the middle, type of thing. And then the run game that is always a threat. I'm going Ravens. Because, like, who do the Cardinals have? James Conner not having a great year, probably because they can't pass very well. And Hollywood Brown, while I love you and I love your tenacity, I'm sorry, but this is not your game. So even though it's in Arizona, Baltimore by 14. Maybe more. I'll actually go 17. Kansas City Chiefs at the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos coming off a victory from my Packers, where when I was walking out, they were saying the Packers sucked. Maybe they're right, but then again, you only beat us by 2. You beat us by 2. But yeah, you're going up against the Chiefs, a team that, you held down, but then Russell Wilson only threw for less than 100 yards. So what's it going to be? Is it going to be the revenge game that everyone's going to talk about, or is it going to be some friggin' dumpster fire of a game? I predict dumpster fire. I do not think that Russell Wilson's stats allegedly make him good. I think that they are kind of the stat patty stats where, I'll make the occasional really crappy throw, and I'll throw out of bounds plenty of times, because unless I'm picking on a rookie corner, I'm referring to Valentine, unless I'm picking on a rookie corner all game, I'm not a good QB. Russell Wilson, oh yeah, oh man. And then here's the other thing. They don't have a run game. Williams, yeah, he had like a career, a year game last week. But guess what? Still didn't have a ton of yards. And you're going up against a better defense than the Packers in Kansas City. And you are just going to get carved up to all hell by Mahomes this game. And who knows? It may be snowing. I know I was out driving today, Ubering, and it was snowing all day. Apparently, it's supposed to get worse tonight. It may not be snowing, but it's going to be cold. And here's the other thing. Those Broncos fans, what a bunch of deadbeats. They didn't even out-margin the Packers in fanship last week. Imagine what Kansas City's going to do. They've been, it's probably near godly impossible to get a seat in Kansas City now that the Taylor Swift phenomena and the Travis Kelce relationship has taken over Arrowhead. And Travis Kelce has been balling out like he's a man on a mission to win Taylor's heart. Okay, enough with my dramatization over this game, but I honestly think that the Chiefs are going to come into Mile High and they are going to murder the Broncos. A Broncos team that barely beat the Packers. And by many accounts, the Packers suck this year, right? They're not a team that's on the cusp of being good. But what's going to happen at Mile High when the third-ranked offense goes up against the dead last defense? Only time will tell. Let's look and see who's hurt, shall we? Chiefs, Nick Bolton's out. Good for the Broncos, but who cares? Nick Bolton's one player. They still have Chris Jones. They still have McDuffie. They still have Snead. The Broncos, Brandon Johnson is out. I don't care that your team is fully healthy. That O-line might have held up pretty well last week, but I don't expect a repeat performance week in and week out because guess what? It is not a good O-line. So guess what? I am going to pick the Chiefs, knock on wood, by 21. Yes, 21. Because the Broncos had their one and done game to prove they could win a close game last week when they could have definitely lost. And guess who's going to do it? This guy with the perfect smile and a whole lot of swag called Travis Kelce. And hell, I'll even say this. Rice could run tables around these guys. So yeah, Chiefs by 21. Moving on, we have Bengals, Niners. Do the Bengals rise up to 4-3 and knock the Niners to 5-3, which would be insane? I do need to check the injury report because is our boy Debo going to play? No, he is not. Brock Purdy had a concussion. If he doesn't play, goodness, what is going to happen? What is going to happen with this Niners team that seemingly looks like, they don't have a QB. No more Garoppolo. No more Trey Lance. Who is their backup? It is Sam Darnold, you guys. Or Brandon Allen. I'm pretty sure it's Darnold. Darnold, who they were saying in preseason was pretty accurate. If he was so damn accurate, he wouldn't have been off the Panthers. If Purdy doesn't play, even though he has been playing, he's been shaky lately, he's still kept them in games. And then you have Cincinnati looking at this. The Bengals, oh, Chase Brown, who cares? And Akeem Davis-Gaither, I'm not going to lie, that kind of hurts. He's a good player. But guess what? The Bengals still have Nixon as their running back, right? Am I thinking of a different player? Guess who? Guess who they have? Guess where he is? Guess who they have? Yes, Joe Mixon. Oh, I said Nixon, didn't I? Nah, Joe Mixon, baby. This guy. And guess what? Burrow is fully healthy with no injury status. I think, personally, that I'm going to give this game to the Bengals. I think it's going to be a crazy thing that if Purdy doesn't play, there's no way this team wins. They do not win. I am sorry. The Bengals, even though they've had the 32nd ranked offense, there is no way that they stay this way. They have too good of a QB, too good of weapons to not get out of this slump. This is insane to me. This is probably the most mind-boggling thing since... This is probably the most mind-boggling thing I've ever seen. To be honest with you, with a quarterback of the caliber of Burrow. But guess what? I am going to give this game to the Bengals because I think that the Niners have had a bad slump without Debo, who is next to McCaffrey as their X Factor weapon. I think that the Bengals can limit McCaffrey, especially in the running game, because I think that their defense, 15th ranked defense, but with an offense that has been underperforming and kicking the ball away, I think that this defense is better than that. I think that they are a very scrappy defense, even with the losses in this last offseason. So yeah, knock on wood, I'm giving the Bengals the win, and I'm going to say they're going to win by 3 because that seemingly has been the Niners' problem in these last 2 games where they barely lose and oh my goodness, the game gets away from them. But yeah, Bengals by 3. Looking at this final game, the Sunday night game, you guys, we have the Bears going to the Chargers at SoFi Stadium in California. And by golly, this could be an interesting game. Looking at these teams, the Bears, having come off a win that I just wouldn't have expected because I thought Crosby was going to take over last week, just pummeling Las Vegas. And, that sort of thing. And obviously heading to the stage of the primetime game of Sunday against our Chargers, who just lost against the Chiefs, who were scoring points eye to eye up until 17, where Kansas City finished the game and shut them out with 2 touchdowns. Obviously, Kansas City being a much better team than the what was I going to say? Okay, that wasn't what I meant to say. I meant to say, so obviously the Bears playing against Las Vegas and then the Chargers playing against Kansas City Chiefs. I personally think that the Chargers take this game. And maybe the fluke that was the Bears line from their last game, maybe they make another appearance. But I personally think that Khalil Mack may be looking for revenge against his former team just because, why did I sign with you guys? You guys never put enough talent around me. We were honestly kind of a joke. Besides the first season he was on the team where it was, I believe it was a first round playoff exit. Maybe he wants revenge. Maybe he wants after Fields. I don't think he'd have much of a vendetta against Fields, to be honest with you, but who knows? But I think that the Chargers get after the Bears and hopefully make Fields struggle. But I also think that the Bears could score a lot because the Chargers defense hasn't been good either. You know, looking at these two defenses, I think they're right around where they should be. I do think that the Chargers have enough talent that they should be better than 24, but they just haven't put it together. You know, and I'm convinced right now that their defensive coordinator is just he's just too fluffy. He doesn't coach these guys the way he needs to, you know, and especially with guys like Mack, Bosa, Derwin James, you know, Asante Samuel Jr., who's, you know, a talented young corner. It's just like, why do you have all this talent, but you just fail to use them, you know, type of thing. But yeah, I think I'm going to give the Chargers the win just because I think Herbert, you went up against a better defense last week in the Chiefs, and now you're going up against the Bears defense that just doesn't do as well. Him and Eckler, I think, can have a day, and I'm going to give the Chargers the win by 7. And guess what, you guys? Those are my predictions for this week. I personally think that it's a pretty good batch of games now that I'm looking at it. Some interesting implications, but other than that, I think I'm going to call it a night. If you guys have any opinions or thoughts on this, then be free to share them with me or down in the comments if you see this after it airs live. But thank you all for watching, and this is Cast, and I am your host, Casty Streeter, and I wish your team the best of luck. Unless, of course, you're a Vikings fan, then no, I don't wish your team the best of luck. But thank you and good night.